And I think one of my predictions is as sort of like AGI becomes more real, a lot of people are going to have midlife crises like pulled forward. Like they're going to have it sooner and sooner because so many of us have like built our entire identity on intellect and like I am smart and I can do things. And when you have machines that can do it better than you, I think a lot of people are going to have this kind of reckoning of, what do I do now?
Before we get started, this episode is sponsored by Newts. Basically, this is my favorite supplement for energy, and I take it whenever I need to lock in. So if you're a founder, student, or new dad like me, you've got to try it. It's got guarana for energy, alpha GPC for memory, and L-theanine to avoid any crashes you're used to with tons of caffeine, energy drinks, or any bullshit like that. Again, try Newts. Just go to sendnewts.com. All right, let's get back to the episode. Welcome back to another episode of Out of Office. You've got me, you've got Jack, and we are interviewing Kasra of Lightpage. How are you doing?
Hello, excited to be here.
That's great. Before we even jump into the company or anything, it'd be cool to kind of establish, where we met, stuff like that. It's definitely a small world.
Yes, I think we originally met at this thing called Edge Esmeralda, May of last year, which is a pop-up village in Healdsburg, California.
And have you done anything like that before?
No, it was sort of a serendipitous thing. I think someone tweeted about it and I was like, oh, I could go there for a week. I think the whole thing was for a month. Were you there for the whole month?
It was for a month. I mean, to tee it up for the audience, basically Edge Esmeralda is this idea of a pop-up city. It's this cool, like tech forward-thinking cult kind of thing. We were there for 3 weeks. We had our whole family with us. We all had a great time, honestly. I think 2 weeks was right for us, and we're only going to do a week this year.
Nice.
But yeah, it was super fun. So you're there for a week?
Yeah, I was there for the first. Are you going back for which week are you going for this year?
The first week, I think.
Cool. Same. Yeah, the week was awesome. I think part of it is I've always grown up in big cities. And so there was just this magical thing of just walking down the street in Healdsburg and you just recognize people and you're like, hey, you want to get lunch? And I imagine that's what being in a small town is like. But I don't know, maybe I'm romanticizing it.
This was like a Gilmore Girls simulator is what I'm hearing.
Kind of like a high-tech Gilmore Girls. What? But solar punk, I would say.
Sure.
Not like high tech, kind of metal. You know what I mean? When people post a futuristic San Francisco and everything is made out of stainless steel. Not like that.
It's more the tree version. Lots of greenery.
Yeah, the tree version.
Yeah.
Amazing. But everyone from trying to solve cancer to psychedelics to buildings, all these, every kind of different thing, kind of at the edge. I was actually invited by this guy, Ubby, who works at Zerion. It's a crypto wallet. And it was fun because it's hey, you should go. You're thinking of new ideas. You're really into crypto. It turns out that crypto week was kind of the weakest, and neither he or anyone else I know showed up for crypto week.
That was the last week, right?
I think it was supposed to be the third week, but it never materialized. Regardless, I had a lot of fun, met a lot of great people, and it was a good time.
Yeah, the people were awesome, and I think maybe the part of the trick was that everyone was very high openness to experience and just high openness to meeting each other. So I think that created a good vibe.
And Kasra, how did you get involved with the pop-up city?
I just saw someone tweet about it. Many great things in my life have happened just because I saw a tweet, which
I love.
That's true. I mean, the last thing I'll leave about this is kind of, like you said, it was so fun to go to Town Square, meet someone working on a blimp or something and chat with them about it. And I remember when I was leaving, and I think I don't know if you had this experience, it was it'd be amazing just to live in a place like this. Should we just move to Healdsburg? And I was wait, no one's going to be here next month though.
Well, I think that's what Devon's trying to do. They're literally trying to make it a permanent city.
For sure. So if anyone is interested in this, go check out Edge Esmeralda. They're doing it again. It's in Healdsburg. What I told myself was it's only an hour and a half from San Francisco. If you live here in the Bay Area, you can always just drive back home. But you won't. It's awesome. And I think Devon is trying to set up a permanent pop-up village, I think outside of Healdsburg. So that'll be cool to check out too. But anyways, Esther, where are you calling us from right now?
I'm in my living room because the room that I usually work out of, there's street construction. So I figured not great for a podcast.
I see. I guess are you here in San Francisco?
I'm in San Francisco. Yeah. How granular? Planet Earth. Yeah.
Yeah.
What level do you want the answer at?
Oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, let's kind of get into it now. So you're working on this app called Lightpage. I think some people think of it as a journal when you first look at it. I thought the same thing as well, but I'm happy to share some of my experience with it. So I downloaded this app, I used it. I thought it was a journal. So I'm like, you know what? I tried Apple Journal when it came out. I'm not much of a journaler. Let me try Lightpage. And what I noticed was I started talking to it like a journal, but it just started asking me questions about all these unrelated things. And I actually had I'll give like a very concrete example. Like this morning, just kind of not feeling it. Just one of those mornings you wake up, kind of low energy, like this day is useless. I guess it's gone is usually how it goes for me. But I go for a walk. I was like, I'm sick of, I'm already 3 hours into X today. So let's not do that. Let's open Lightpage instead. But I don't know what to say because I'm low energy. I don't have like an idea for the day. And it prompts me, it's just like, hey, if you could snap your fingers and learn one thing that would help you with your podcast, because it knows that's what I'm working on these days, what would it be? And so then I start talking with it. I tell it, I really want to do short form content. Like if I could just magically learn that skill, that would be amazing for top of funnel for us. And it's like, oh, so what's holding you back? And I was like, well, I hate TikTok. I hate short form content. And I have no interest in making it because I have no interest in watching it. And then we have this back and forth. It's like, oh, well, earlier you told me you got a compliment about your writing and you're comfortable with Twitter and other platforms like that. Why don't you just start writing medium-sized tweets or blog posts every week that is informed by your podcast? Use the skills you like to the ultimate goal of improving your podcast and your media business. So it was pretty profound. I know saying that out loud sounds like a conversation to have with a friend, which I think is amazing because it wasn't a friend. It was my phone.
Yeah.
And so I kind of plan on putting that into action, and it's been amazing so far, and I've barely used it.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's I think that's a good segue. And like, it is kind of a journal, but we don't call it that. Partially because I think there's a lot of people, including sort of like when I think of myself in my early 20s, that have sort of a negative reaction to that word, or I think it carries some baggage. Like, I'm not a journaler. Like, I don't need that stuff. And I have friends, right, who fell into that bucket. But I'd be like, oh, no, Lightpage is not a journal. Just like use it as a notepad or use it as your scratch pad. And they'd start doing that. And then at some point, sort of like what you're saying, like they would have a moment where like either like something was sort of off or they just needed to explore something, and they sort of fall into the journaling / like coaching almost modality. And then they're like, oh, okay, I get it. So that's part of why we don't call it a journal like on the label, just because I think some of the people that probably would benefit most from it would sort of self-select out.
Yeah, it's like Tom Riddle's diary a little bit, you know?
Yes, but not evil.
Yeah. Not evil, but like a nice, good, great version of Tom Riddle's diary.
Yeah,
Perfect.
exactly.
That's so cool. Yeah, when Karthik shared the app with me, I downloaded it. I haven't played with it nearly as much as Karthik, but when I watched your demo was like awesome. I got it immediately because I'm a big notepad guy. If you looked at my notepad, there's like song lyrics, there's random notes to myself, there's me like complaining about something to myself. And I think if my notepad talked back, which I want to start doing with your app, I might get more out of it. Like venting is nice, but when I'm having, for example, this weekend, my brother's my co-founder, we spent like 6 hours talking about the direction of the business. And if I didn't have my brother, that would have just been a long note. And instead, if it were a long note that could talk back to me and we could work through things, I think that's magic. It's like a co-founder in a box, or like just a friend in a box, really.
Totally. I think there's actually a couple of like interesting tangents on this. One is just like why a notes app as the metaphor. And I think part of it is a lot of sort of AI apps like ChatGPT or whatever, like you're constantly in conversation, which I find like it's too much. I don't always want like a response right away. Sometimes I just want to like be solo and brain dump. But then it's really nice to be able to kind of switch and be like, okay, now I want some like feedback, or I want some like a sparring partner or a thought partner. And then the other thing you said of like venting, I think venting is actually a very common on-ramp to whatever looks like journaling. Like I've talked to a lot of people about like, how did you get into journaling? And they're like, well, you know, I was just like having a really bad day or like a really bad month that I just started venting a lot. And sometimes that doesn't go well, right? Because like if you just vent and then you're like, I don't know if that helped. Like I just kind of ruminated and I sort of made myself feel worse. And then you like review your journal and you remember how shitty your day was. But I think it's an interesting like moment because it's like, okay, there's some like energy that you're trying to like dispel. Part of like behind the scenes, like Lightpage tries to, if you are venting, it'll try to be like, oh, this person's venting. Like, let me try to like, let them get it out, but like make sure they get to the next step of like, okay, you've gotten it all out, but like, now what? Like, what are you going to do about this? And try to sort of like compel them to action a little bit, sort of subtly.
Can you tell us, how did you get here? Why did you want to work on this? And maybe not only like from a personal perspective, what brought you to make this company? I'm also curious, like, were there any like technical breakthroughs? Like, what are all the things, even the littlest things that kind of led up to this?
Yeah. Oh boy, where to start? I guess I'll go way back.
Please.
So, you know, I've been sort of writing code for a really long time since I was a kid. And I always had in the back of my mind, like, I want to start a company. Like I want to do something. And when I graduated, this is like more than 10 years ago, I ended up kind of getting nerd sniped by the founders of Airtable, because at the time, I think it was just the four of them. You know, as I was graduating, I was like, oh, somebody should make a thing that like is like a database for normal people. And then I found Airtable and I started contracting with them, and I was like, they're kind of doing the thing I wanted to build. So I ended up joining as one of the first employees there, and that was really fun. Like I spent 5 years there, got to build a lot of stuff. So that was sort of like detour number one, where I was like, yeah, I want to start a company, but like, let's do this first. Like, let's see how this goes. And then near the end of my time at Airtable, I was like, okay, now I'm really going to do it. And then I got nerd sniped again by the founders of Watershed, who I met through a mutual friend, and I ended up joining them as their first employee. And that was like a very different company. It's a climate company. They built sort of enterprise software. But that was another like fun, like 2.5 year detour where I learned a lot. But then I was like, okay, now I'm actually going to do it. So I left, and I took a year basically like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And that was actually a pretty rough year. Like I was like really thrashing. I was trying out lots of ideas, sort of trying to do a lot of the like B2B startup playbook of like talk to people and like figure out what the problems are. And I had a bunch of threads that I pulled, but none of them really grabbed me. I kept sort of like putting ideas back on the shelf and being like, okay, that could be good, but like, let me go explore some other thing. And at the end of that year, I sort of hit rock bottom, because I was like, okay, I've kind of spent a year. I don't have anything really to show for it. And I don't have conviction about any of these ideas. And obviously throughout that year, I was journaling a lot. I'd been journaling sort of on and off before that as well, but that was like the year where I really got into it. And at some point, this little seed of an idea entered my head of like, wait a minute, this is like a thing I have a lot of opinions about. And no one seems to be kind of building it in the way that I would build it. And it wasn't like I woke up one day and I was like, oh yeah, this is it. But it did feel kind of qualitatively different, in that all the other ideas would sort of like, there'd be a little bit of excitement and then it would peter out. But this one was like a little seed, and then it sort of started to grow. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like this is like pulling me more and more into it. Where I was like, yeah, actually, I want to work on this, because even if it fails, I think I'll have a lot of fun working on it. So, which I think is probably a good sign on like thing you should work on.
Yeah, for sure. A thread we're really seeing doing these interviews is there is something about money and all the other things that come, and that is a good driver, but it's usually just like, okay, I can't let this thing go, and I have to see what's going to happen next. Did you start building Lightpage alone, or did you start asking friends about it, looking for a co-founder, working with other people? How was the very beginning of Lightpage?
I started prototyping it alone, and then a good friend of mine has been helping kind of build a lot of it alongside me. But yeah, initially it was just like me prototyping and trying to like show it to my friends, be like, hey, you want to like come work on this with me? Yeah, but for the last 9 months, which is sort of when we've really been working on it, it's been me and my friend Raghav.
That's awesome. And it's still just the two of you, I imagine?
Yep.
And how long ago was that?
I think the first like real commit was May 6th of 2024. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's very high quality polished app. So I'll just put that out there. I guess as you've been building it, how long have customers been using it? I guess that's a better question.
I think we started to let in like a couple of really close people, like my brother, maybe about 6 months ago. Yeah, okay. But it was like way less developed 6 months ago. Really, I would say like in the last month or two, where like people have been using the current sort of incarnation.
And did anything surprise you from those initial users, and have they shaped the evolution of the product so far? Yeah, a bunch of surprises. One was just kind of, I've always worked on B2B stuff in my career up until this point. And as a product person, I like things that where if you like invest a lot in the product quality, like you should get something out of it. Like it should sort of be rational to invest in product quality. But I think for a lot of B2B stuff, like it's actually not that rational. You should like invest more of your resources into like marketing or sales or whatever. And one of my theories was like, if I work on something in consumer, like I get to invest in product quality, and it makes sense to do that. And that like was very much true. Like even when we were testing it with literal family members, if it was like a little janky in some way, they'd just be like, screw this. Like, I'm not going to use it. So it was like, you get no grace, I think, with consumer stuff. So that was surprise number one. And then I think surprise number two is just like how hard it is to like introduce new metaphors. Like, I think we're not actually introducing that many new metaphors. It's like, it's notes plus chat, two very established metaphors. But the moment we tried to sort of combine them,
sort of everything went off the rails, right? People are like, wait, like, I don't understand. Like, am I in a note? Am I in a chat? Like, what is going on here? And that took a lot of back and forth to sort of clarify that.
And so you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned this, maybe I mentioned this to myself when you were talking, but it really feels like you didn't build, measure, learn necessarily your way to building the product. There was some like Jobsian approach to it. And I say Jobsian as in he built high quality products first. He didn't release anything that was mediocre and iteratively get better. Is that why you guys aren't live yet? I mean, the product is amazing. Like, it looks beautiful. It works really well. It's not live yet. That suggests you're waiting until it's in a very good state. Is that correct? Is that consumer only? Like, how do you think about that?
It was, for most of the sort of journey, that was correct. That's why we didn't launch it yet. But I think now it's finally at a point where, like, at least at a V1, it's like good enough to launch. And right now we're just sort of like buttoning up some of the infrastructure so that we can open it up, like making sure our rate limits are sort of where they need to be with our infrastructure providers, and going through like the App Store review thing and stuff like that. But yeah, I think, 9 months is definitely like longer than I think the current median AI company to like launch.
Yeah. Got it. And you've worked on a lot of B2B apps. You mentioned a little bit about the difference now working on a consumer app. Were those all the differences? Are there other differences building consumer versus B2B?
So I would say like Airtable, at least in the early days, was like prosumer in some ways. And actually we were like, we thought it was going to be way more prosumer. Like, this was in the era of like Evernote and Dropbox being like the hot companies. And it's like, oh yeah, you get people to use it for personal stuff and then they bring it to work. And so like, I remember in the very early days of Airtable, like, we were trying to position it as like, oh, you should use Airtable to like organize your wedding or to like do your apartment hunt and stuff like that. And we're like, well, one day we'll like figure out how to get into businesses.
Yeah.
So it did have a little bit of that consumer element to it.
Got it.
And then Watershed was like very different. It was like top-down enterprise sales from day one. And then, so, if you imagine like sort of a spectrum from like hardcore B2B to like consumer, Airtable was like in the middle, Watershed is on this side, and then I think products like Lightpage are on the way other side. And yeah, I think it's like, you just have way less rope, basically. Like, you have to nail every like moment of the experience. I think when people start using a tool for work, they're like, yeah, this, like, I'm gonna like power through this. And I don't know how much of it is just like expectations are lower, because like B2B software tends to be worse, and like you're like, I don't have that many alternatives. But with consumer, like, the alternative is I'm gonna close your app and I'm gonna open TikTok or Twitter, and those are great apps. So I think the dynamics are different because of that.
Interesting. And so we're in a little bit of a consumer moment, I feel like, in the Silicon Valley right now. I know a lot of people building consumer apps. And there's almost this, like, they'll acknowledge it openly that retention is not something they're expecting. Like, they're expecting to market this app on TikTok to get 1 million people to sign up for 99 cents a month and then cancel. And that's like the business. Yours feels very different. I think it is very different. Do you have thoughts on that, or is that just an observation that I'm telling you right now?
No, I think that's correct. And I think both are valid. Like, I think a lot of those consumer apps, I think of them as like sort of similar to the movie business, right? It's like, your movie doesn't have retention. You're just trying to get like an audience, make a bunch of money, and then like move on to the next movie, which is totally fine. I think you do get into some like slightly ethical quandaries where they're like, oh, we actually hope they forget to cancel. And that feels pretty gross. But if you kind of solve for that, it seems fine to be like, this is like an entertaining experience, and you like pay a couple of bucks for it, and then you like move on with your life. Lightpage, yeah, I think just because of what I'm interested in, and what I think the sort of like longer term vision is hoping to be something that you use for a really long time.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say, and then we can maybe move on. I see Lightpage too. Journaling is something. I don't know if you've heard this quote. Like, people find God at their lowest moments. I feel like people find journaling at their lowest moments. Right? COVID, I had a full factory reset of my psyche. And I did a lot of journaling through that process. But as I've stabilized, we'll call it, I haven't journaled as much. I feel like there's a position with your app, because it is so flexible. I can use it at work. I can use it for my personal life. It's almost this companion that grows with me over the years. Is that part of your thesis? I'm curious.
100%. Yeah. And it's, my journey has been similar, right? Like, I journaled at some of my lowest moments, but I always journal just like in Apple Notes. I didn't use any other app. And that's actually really common in terms of what I've seen other people. Like, they're like, yeah, I use Apple Notes for everything. And yes, I think journaling is sort of actually a good sort of moment to get new users, basically, because they're looking for answers or they're looking for relief in some way. But it is churny, right? Like you like hopefully solve the problem and then they don't need you anymore. But I think if you are this sort of like notebook plus coach or guide, you can help with all kinds of stuff, right? Like just like a trivial example, I've been trying to like get a little bit better at cooking. And so I mess around with recipes and I put them in Lightpage. And the other day I just like made something from the stuff in my fridge, sort of intuitively. And then I saved it and I was like, oh, wait a minute. I can like ask the AI, and I just like hit the chat button. I was like, are there any real dishes that are similar to this as a way for me to like make it better? And it gave me like 3 real things. And I was like, oh, and by the way, I know you're Persian. And so here's a Persian dish that's very similar to what you've made. And there's these little things that like can make your life just like a little bit better. I think that's kind of cool.
That's amazing.
Do you find it hard, since Jack mentioned this really is for your whole life? Actually, the notepad example is great. Like if Lightpage becomes your notepad, I think it's going to work really well for you. But that's probably a hard sell. I'm kind of curious how you think about marketing that and getting people to realize what Lightpage can do or what it should do for you.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of experiments I want to try. Right now, obviously, even though we don't call it a journal, like as soon as you get in, we sort of like put you on the rails to do like some kind of journaling. And that's mainly because like those are anecdotally like the strongest moments sort of emotionally happen in those paths. And then you can kind of like expand from there. But I think there are other paths that are kind of interesting. There's a bit of a revealed preference thing among some users of, I don't really need it for journaling, but I would love it for basically like accountability, right? Like I want to use this thing to help me set goals and then help me hit my goals through some combination of like inspiration and tough love, basically. And I think there's something interesting there too.
For sure. How are you thinking through monetization? My guess is there's going to be some kind of monthly fee at some point. But that always makes me kind of concerned with these personal apps. Is it going to be like, how much is enough money, basically? Because at a certain point, most of these apps, they become prosumer and then work apps, and then none of the features are for, me anymore. So kind of curious how you feel about that and kind of what the plan is, or if you're just building and you're going to figure it out.
No, yeah, we're going to definitely do a like monthly subscription probably in the next month. We're going to turn it on just because it is expensive to run this thing.
Oh, for sure.
I'm just like personally not that interested in building another like business app. Like I've been there, done that. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine yesterday about this, who is sort of in the idea maze, and he's exploring a lot of B2B ideas. And I was telling him about my own sort of like journey through that. There's this like Jeff Bezos thing of like, I like to bet on things that I know won't change. And I actually think right now building in B2B is like the exact opposite of that, because I can't make any predictions about like what work is going to look like, especially work that happens in front of a computer, in the next like 18 months. And so that feels like way riskier to me to build on, rather than instead of building for consumers, where like I think the core drivers of like humans isn't really going to change.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, because we don't know. I mean, you're working at an AI company, Jack's working at an AI company. Who knows what work's going to look like? People keep saying it's going to be completely different maybe within 5 years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Knowing where the puck is going, you want to build where the puck is going, and no one even knows like what the ice rink is going to look like in 12 months. That's so interesting.
Yeah, I feel like I'm building around a puck that isn't moving. Like people are going to have problems forever. Yeah.
Could you, I know you maybe can't tell us the secret sauce, but I'm kind of curious, where were like the places for innovation? I assume you're using off the shelf models. You could tell us maybe which ones are, with DeepSeek and stuff, have these new ones been useful to you? But I'm even more curious, like, have you just become an expert on prompt engineering? Like, there's so many different levels to this. And I'm curious because it really works well as a friend and a partner. And I imagine you worked a while on that.
Yeah. Without getting like too much into the details, we use a variety of models. Claude Sonnet is one of the big ones for us. Like we've tried some of the new ones as well, and like maybe for some things we'll switch to it. They really like, I think, nailed it with Claude's sort of like EQ, I would say. That said, we actually have a bunch of people that used to use Claude for this kind of stuff. Like they would basically like journal with Claude. Then they switched over to Lightpage because they're like, oh, for some reason like this feels even better than Claude out of the box. And I think that basically comes down to probably two things. One is some of the prompting that we do around sort of giving it a little bit more direction in terms of how it should like push and pull against you. And then I think the other really important thing is memory. Like it just like makes a huge difference if it can recall something that is relevant to you in that moment. And memory is there's a really deep rabbit hole on memory, and like ChatGPT now has memory, and I think they're making it better, and I'm sure Claude will have memory in like the next 3 months. But there's a lot there. Like it's not like you either have memory or you don't. It's sort of like, what kind of memory do you have, and what is the things that it's sort of like remembering or choosing to sort of resurface that I think can make a really big difference in how it feels to talk.
And speaking on memory, how do you feel it's going to perform over time? Because I think a lot of people look at email or kind of this botched launch of Apple Intelligence and just think like, look, you know everything about me, right? Like my iOS device knows literally everything about me, but they basically service nothing. And now I do think they could do a better job than they have done. What people expect for it to know everything about you, perfect recall, is also very hard. Same thing in Gmail. Gemini is terrible. Like it cannot like, hey, when was that flight, a year ago? It doesn't know anything about it. And so I think some people think, oh, just use RAG, it's done. It's not done at all. And so how do you feel about how Lightpage works well now? I've also made less than 10 entries, right? And conversations, I guess there's so many different things you can do with Lightpage, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. Over time, once it's 100 entries, 1,000 entries, how confident are you in how well the memory will work? Or is it just is it an iterative process of getting better and better at this?
It's 100% iterative. Like, yeah, it's not perfect. For me, I have like a lot of notes in there. Sometimes it'll forget stuff. And I think part of it is, I guess, a multi-part answer to this. One is, context windows are getting bigger. That'll help. But you do also just need to be good at like putting the right stuff into the context still. And I think in practice, at least for the ways that people use Lightpage, there is like a pretty heavy recency bias, which helps us. Like whatever you're kind of dealing with or talking about, most of the time it's like stuff from the last couple of weeks. So that helps us. That gives us a little bit of margin. But yeah, I think it's not perfect. It's one of the things I think there's actually a lot of interesting ideas we have to make it better. And we are hiring. So if you want to work,
are you using any sort of vector database as like a longer term memory? Is it mostly context window dependent?
We don't use a vector database right now.
I have refrained from asking too many questions because we're building. I build an infrastructure platform, and we're adding like a long-term memory bolt-on for LLMs. I was like, I don't want to ask you and steal your secret sauce or anything. Kept my mouth shut, but okay, good to know. Interesting.
And Kasra, is this a place of innovation for Lightpage? Like, is this something like a hard technical challenge that you need to solve directly, or is there always a hope that there'll be some open source solution or someone else will figure it out?
I feel like building with LLMs, this is sort of a tangential answer, but I think building with LLMs, I'm like less into the idea of using any sort of dependency because you immediately sort of like cede control. I'm like, that maybe made sense in a world where like code is expensive and like you ideally want to basically like offload the maintenance of some component to a third party. But now like half the things that we use like dependencies, they frustrate me because I can't go and like edit them without sort of like forking the upstream. And I'm like, can't the AI just kind of like take this and just like fork it for me and then like maintain it forever? So that's something I'm kind of curious about. But I think for the core stuff around memory for us, I honestly have a hard time imagining like we would like use some other provider for that because it's just like one of the key places where we control the experience.
I see. That kind of makes me think of a meta question of like, packages in general. I think always on Twitter, there'll be some ex-engineer. It's like, oh, I don't need packages. Like, I'm a better programmer than everyone else. And they'll just do everything on their own. And there are times where that makes sense, but obviously it's kind of just being like braggadocious. Like they probably do use them. And it's obviously useful to stand on the shoulder of giants. But going forward with AI, do you see a path where if the models are getting smarter and smarter, and like every time you're going to use a package, maybe an LLM will just write it for you. So you're getting the same convenience. And maybe it's writing the same thing for everybody. Do you kind of see like that kind of relationship with changing over time, or
I think there's something interesting here. Like I don't necessarily think it makes sense to like write it from scratch every time. But like when I think about the open source packages that we use, like, we use something for audio recording, we use something for the rich text editor. These are like, chunky packages that you wouldn't necessarily want to like reinvent the wheel on. But they are also packages where like, in fact, in both of those cases, we have basically forked them and made our own modifications to it. The main problem with that is now you no longer get the advantage of all the upstream fixes. And so I think there is the interesting thing of like, can you take open source packages, fork them, and like make your own modifications to it, but basically have the AI sort of like pull in upstream changes for you so that you're benefiting from the commons, and also you get to have your own kind of like patches applied on top of it that stays up to date.
Interesting. It's almost like there's a world where each LLM can keep learning and then sharing this wealth with every other programmer. And that's kind of the nice way to think about it. Or is it that they are just harvesting every human's ability to program to just be done with us?
Well, I think humans are the ones that need the programs. So I'm like, put it back in the commons and like make it easier to build more software. I think that's net good.
How comfortable would you be with them kind of learning from, your supposed IP and things that you're innovating on?
Yeah, probably not great. I think, I think it's sort of, you want to have good expectations. Like, again, I don't really care if, again, those two examples of like the audio recording package that we use in the rich text editor, like, yeah, if it didn't cost me like time and energy, I would love to merge our changes back into the upstream and like contribute it back to everybody that uses this package, because those are not where like Lightpage differentiates, right? And so like if an LLM wants to do that, I'm totally fine with it. But I think it's just important to have boundaries around like, okay, this is like maybe our memory system and some of the other stuff, like that's sort of proprietary, but like a lot of the stuff, it's not that unique to us. And if we're doing something to make it better, yeah, why don't we give it back to other people that would benefit?
Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen this debate online recently where they're like Stack Overflow like takes a longer amount of time, but you get a lot of knowledge, and ChatGPT takes no time, but you don't learn anything. Obviously, there is kind of an old guard that's going to be upset with new tools, and that's true of every technology. I think there's some truth with it, but it probably lies in between. For me, it kind of more brought up the question, is programming just a means to an end? I imagine for most people it is, and then for some people it's kind of an art and something they enjoy.
Yep. This is kind of interesting because we've been interviewing engineers because we're trying to hire like a couple product and systems engineers. I don't have enough data points to be like, this is a trend. Sort of, there might be smoke here where, especially folks that are earlier in their career, for our first interview, which is like a coding screen, we asked them to turn off, Copilot or any AI assistant that they use. Like for that question, it's not just that I want to see them program, but like I want to see how they think. And it has been kind of remarkable for some of the people that I think maybe like grew up with Copilot, which is kind of a crazy thing because it doesn't seem that old. They really struggle. They really struggle with like even thinking about like, okay, how do I translate this problem into the right data models or data structures? And that scares me a little bit because like, I don't know how long we're going to be in this interim where like you need software engineers to like think about stuff, probably for a while. And so I need to see that sort of like proof of thinking, and the level at which I've seen it for a lot of people recently has been a little bit alarming.
Do you think there would be a way to screen candidates? Because the counter argument, well, if they're using it once they work for you, then they may as well use it for the interview. But I wonder, is there a way to, I totally hear the problem you're faced with. Do you think there's a way to judge someone using AI on being able to do systems thinking and stuff like that?
Yeah, sort of. The way we've like designed our interview loop right now is like for the first one, no AI, just because it's a simple question, I think. And then it's like, okay, once you get past that, then we like to do sort of a work trial depending on schedules and stuff like that. And there it's more like, okay, let's see what you can do like fully unleashed. And there you can use like whatever tools you want, bring all the AI, because at the end of the day, we just want to see like given n amount of hours, how much can you ship? And it's like, what's the quality of the thing you ship? So it's a little bit, we try to decouple like the first question, the first interview is like, we just want to see your like raw thinking as much as possible. And then the work trial is just like armed with all the best technology. Like, what can you do?
So I'll say in my experience, I know how to program. I'm pre-AI, you could call it. I learned how to write C when I was 14 or whatever. And nowadays, I do use Cursor a lot. I use it to fill in the blanks for me. And I'll say working in a code base with multiple contributors, I run into problems sometimes. I won't check my work as diligently because I'm mostly a marketing guy these days. And my brother will have a conniption. He's like, dude, this is awful code. Like this is not compatible with the rest of the code base. So to that point, there almost is merit to like knowing how to program and clean up the AI's bad work. Because I find myself having to do that anyway. You know, I'll try to get something out. The AI is just not clicking. I'll go in and fix it. It takes me an hour, but it would take me 4 hours trying to prompt it to a fix. I totally hear that. I think there's something with working with multiple engineers in a complex code base.
Totally. Yeah.
Have either of you used tools like Devin at your companies?
I've not played with Devin yet. Just Cursor and a little bit of Windsurf.
Interesting. That's the second time Windsurf has come up. I've never heard about it naturally, but it looks like people like it.
I can't quite figure out the difference between Cursor and Windsurf. In my head, they're sort of interchangeable, but sorry to both of those teams. I think they probably didn't like me saying that.
What draws you to one or the other? I'm just curious.
I feel like I have this like thing in the back of my head of like, why isn't the AI writing more code for me? Like where are these AI engineers? And so I'm always like almost like a little worried that we're not using enough AI. And so I'm always like, all right, let's see, like can Windsurf like write more code, or like if I use Cursor in this way, can it do more? But yeah, it's just from the sense of like, I think it could do more if it was just like set up correctly.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw something out there. I wonder if either of you have comments on this, but you know, when DeepSeek came out, people were obviously pretty excited. Forget where the data came from or how it was made. It's here now. And a lot of people capitalize like, okay, Venice, this decentralized one, was like, hey, we're hosting it in the US and we don't read any of your messages, so try it here. Perplexity added it, and Perplexity is amazing with R1. Like it made the app like 10 times better. And so obviously these supposed wrapper companies are going to get a lot of gains from R1 and newer models to come out after it. But then later I was kind of reading this thread where, you know, just being hosted on US servers isn't enough. Who knows if it has some like secret code word, or like, you know, it could be pre-trained to do something bad. Maybe not to send data back because you can, it's just a model, like it can't do that. But maybe it could do something, you know, nefarious. Or as Jack, if you step back more and more and let Claude, use this model, it's going to put things in your code base. It seems a little paranoid to me. I feel like you would notice, at least I guess in this case, Neil, like your brother would notice that something malicious has been added to the code base. But once everyone starts trusting it, maybe not. Do either of you, is this just like tinfoil hat territory? Or is there potentially something there?
I think it's plausible.
Yeah, go for it, Kasra.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I think it's totally plausible, both in sort of the attack model of like, it puts code in when you're not watching it, and maybe it's like, oh, you must always have an American model code review the other models. But I also think like, aside from code, like if you are talking to these things, and like Lightpage, people talk about very personal stuff. So like, even if it has like a sort of an ideological bent, and it can sort of slightly influence people, I think that can be pretty dangerous. Like, I mean, people were rightly kind of concerned about the TikTok algorithm, like swaying the voting populace. And this could be sort of another version of that.
Yeah, I love that we had to talk about TikTok a few episodes back, and I fully agree with you there. And I'll also say the security side of things. So I've made the like faux pas of committing an API key before to GitHub. I can imagine there are a lot of junior engineers, especially engineers that have never had to really go through security reviews or anything on a pull request, who are absolutely going to be committing just anything and everything to GitHub as long as it works, right? And so I think there's a potential attack vector there. Not sure what it is, but I'm sure it's happening, or it's going to happen.
So yeah, we'll have to see what happens. Kasra, coming a little bit back to Lightpage itself, when people start using this app, we've described it as a friend here. Maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a co-founder. How do you think it is going to impact people's relationships? I personally I haven't embodied it, at least not yet. For me, it is a tool that I use, and I haven't felt any differently about it. But I'm curious how you think about that, how maybe other users think about that going forward, both in Lightpage and beyond when we have these companion style apps.
Yeah. I guess two things. Like, one is, what is your relationship to this thing? And then how does it affect your like human to human relationships? The word we use to describe the AI in Lightpage is guide. And we actually like thought a lot about all the other potential words like friend or companion or like assistant. And guide was the one we liked the most because of this analogy around like, if you're climbing a mountain, you might hire a guide. And I think that captures a couple of interesting sort of nuances. One is that you are hiring this thing. And so ultimately, like you're in control of like whether the relationship continues or not. It's not unlike a friendship. Like friendships tend to be more symmetrical, right? Like the power dynamic is symmetrical, and this is not that. And the reason you hire a guide is presumably because they know things, or they know things you don't, or they can help you in ways that you need it. So there is a little bit of like openness, or like almost like a little bit of deference. Like I'm going to listen to what you have to say. And I thought those were two important sort of like things to capture about the relationship. So that's why we call it a guide. In terms of how I think it's going to affect human-to-human relationships, my hope, and we're seeing some anecdotes that this is true, is that it's going to help those relationships. Both in the sense that like, I think a lot of like close human relationships would benefit a little bit more from like, if there's a problem, like dealing with it rather than running away from it. And I personally used it in this way a bunch of like, hey, like this friend or like my partner or whatever, like something feels off here, and I don't want to just like brush it under the rug. And then it's really helpful to sort of like have a Lightpage session and just go through it, like just kind of get it all out, like what's going on with like what's going on in my head, like what am I curious about in terms of what's going on with this person. And then you take that and you go have a really like productive conversation with that person. And I've done it a bunch of my friends have done it, and they've told me about it. And that just feels like a super like net positive of like, you can go into these conversations sort of prepared in the sense that like, you're not going to just like say the first thing that comes to mind, but you're like, okay, I've like figured out what's going on inside me, and I can kind of share that with you openly and kindly, and then let you kind of tell me what's going on with you, and we can sort of get to a place where we're both happy.
And does Lightpage learn, I suppose, how you want to be talked to? Or can you guide the guide on how you want it to respond? I imagine, for example, the example you gave right there is, you're having a relationship problem. You might go to your friend and have beers over it, but like, A, depending on who your friend is, you're going to end up walking away with potentially a different answer. And B, like beers aren't going to help. Is Lightpage going to choose the most reasonable, or how do you know what it's going to say? Or I guess, what's its personality like?
A lot of that is actually based on like just what I want personally. So, we sort of try to prompt it in a way that I'm like, okay, what I would want it to say in this case is the following. That does necessarily create like a bit more of an opinionated experience. I can imagine there are some people that are going to try Lightpage and be like, I don't vibe with the personality of this thing. And I think that's okay. And there is a little bit of flexibility. Like it tries to sort of like learn from how you talk to it and what your sort of like implicit preferences are. And also like people, it's funny, like I have to tell people to do this. Like sometimes my friends will text me and be like, I didn't like how it responded about this, or like it's doing this thing I don't like. And I'm like, just tell it. I don't know why you're texting me. You can talk to the thing. And there's I think a new like behavior that people are learning, that you can just tell these things, especially if they have memory. You can tell them what you want or what you don't want, and then they will do it. So it's like a new thing, because people I think are used to like, I'm going to go into the settings and like find a thing, find like a button. It's like, you can just tell it.
That's interesting. And because it's both a journaling and a chat app, or a note-taking and a chat app, is the reason people feel like they can't just tell it because it is more of a journal or chat app than a note app than a chat app? Or I'm sure there's a really tough balance there. You mentioned at the beginning, how do you mold these two together and make it feel like it's not just like reading your diary? Or maybe you want it to exactly feel like it's just reading your diary.
I think we're pretty upfront that like it's going to read your stuff, and like that's the point. I think the reason why people don't tell it their preferences is, again, I think like previously you couldn't do that, like in any system, including ChatGPT or Claude, because they don't have memory. It would forget your preferences after that chat, and so it's just like, I think a new thing. It'll take a little bit of time for people to.
And sorry if I'm beating a dead horse, but I imagine there's also the idea that if it's mostly just reading your diary, which sounds like a feature, it'd almost be weird to almost tell God, like, hey, God, I want you to be a little bit different with how you respond to my diary entries. I don't know if there's even a thought there, but just
that is why we call it guide and not God.
Again,
I think seriously, like, I think it does capture the like relationship dynamic properly of like, you hire a guide, so you get to kind of like express your preferences on how you want to be guided.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Personally, I like how the guide talks now. All right, Jack, you put it out there.
Sorry.
But it doesn't feel like a person, like it doesn't have too much personality. Like, I don't know if you guys ever used Pi, like Reid Hoffman's old Like, that was great. Like, I'm just talking to this person and she's my friend, but like, it almost was too embodied. Like, this is a person. Like, I almost feel like uncomfortable saying certain things to her. Whereas with the guide, it's obvious that it's a specific experience trying to help me as much as possible. But I don't think I never feel like there's so much like opinion or anything, if you get what I'm saying, Jack. It just feels like it's helping me get my shit done and like kind of staying out of the way. It's interesting. My experience has been, at first, like I said earlier, I type into it like a journal at first, but now I kind of feel, I don't know if I'm learning the app or I've just picked the features I like. But now I rarely write anything. I just kind of be like, okay, prompt me. It gives me 3 prompts. We have a productive conversation and I move on. Because the part that's nice is that it can work like a journal or it can prompt you. And both you writing and the chats are kind of just combined into, I don't even know what you call it, a page, a note. I guess I don't really care, which is kind of nice. I don't want to care, like I want to throw myself out there, have a conversation, walk away, and just have it do what it does. I actually have never looked back. It's been super useful, but I haven't had to look back yet, which is also interesting.
I think that's kind of the goal, is like, you shouldn't have to look back. It should just like bring stuff up as you need it.
Yep. And there's this little feature where, I don't know if it's every day or every time you use the app, where like a beautiful image appears with like a quote or something about the painting. And then there's an interesting quote that always have to do exactly with what you're thinking and are like pretty motivational. One, I have a lot of questions, but I'll start with like, how did you come up with a feature? Like what made you put that in?
Yeah. The backstory for that is like, when I thought about sort of like moments in my life where I felt like I made like a big leap of understanding or insight or self-awareness or whatever, it was sort of often because I randomly came across some work, whether it was like a book or an article or a piece of art, that sort of reflected my own experiences back at me in a more digestible or crystallized way. Like, it's like, oh, that person had the same experience as me, and that's what they did in this situation. And now I can decide, like, do I want to take some of that, or do I want to like try a different thing? So it's just like a really nice way to not having to like figure out all of life from first principles. And so the whole idea there is, how can we have that happen less randomly? If Lightpage knows about whatever you're trying to do, like your goals or your challenges or anything, can we help connect you with sort of the wisdom of humanity? And that might be a quote, or that might be a painting, or we now also like try to find blog posts that reflect your own experiences. So you can go literally read someone's blog post of like, oh, when I was feeling this way, this is what I did. And all of these are just ways to sort of like connect you to other people's experiences.
And these quotes and images, firstly, the artwork it's actual art, or is it generated, or is it a mix?
Yeah, good question. We used to generate them, and then we experimented with real art, and it was just like almost everyone was like, the real art is so much better. Like, I don't care about this generated art. It was just kind of an interesting, like, I think people are already like sick of AI slop.
Yeah.
And so we just killed that, and now it's always a real painting. And I do think there's something interesting there in terms of like, what are people's preferences going to be in the long run? I do think there's always going to be this craving of like, I want AI to like connect me with other human works, but I don't necessarily want to be consuming AI works when it comes to art, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting because every user is going to be open to using AI. I don't know why the hell you'd be using Lightpage if you're not.
Yeah.
But I expect that the guide itself during the experience to kind of give me generated information. Everything it says to me is generated. And so it's kind of a nice counterbalance to be like, oh, here are like works by humans that are kind of related. I guess that's why I never have had the experience with generated art. I've only been using the app since it's been artwork, to the best of my knowledge. But I think that balance is pretty good. Do you have to curate this stuff beforehand, or are you finding it on the fly?
We have a really large collection of basically like uncopyrighted art. Luckily, most of the art was made in the 1700s, so that's pretty good. And then we basically, every day, your guide will go and try to crawl our entire library and try to find you one painting that it thinks you will really like.
Is that done just through a vision model? It knows how you are, it looks at the picture, and it decides. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So you're actually looking at you're using vision. It's not like a description of the art or
It's both.
Like
yeah, it's both. It's like vision, description of the art, and also like the description of the artist, because sometimes the connection is not necessarily the art, but like, hey, this artist like went through a thing that's similar to what you're going through.
Well, it's 3 for 3 so far. Like I've enjoyed all of it so far, so I'm curious how it goes going forward. Okay, so Kasra, Jack, do you have anything else on the app itself or no?
No, no. Thank
Okay,
you. That is
so
amazing. Yeah, so far.
I'm gonna run through. We have a docket, Kasra. You shared some stuff that's interesting to you right now, so I'm just gonna hard pivot right into one of these. One that's totally unrelated. You wrote Arc of Midlife Crises. Tell me more.
Oh yeah. Actually, very related.
Great.
Because that year that I mentioned where I was sort of like thrashing and all that stuff, one of the random books that I read was about midlife crises. And I read it and I was like, this is what's happening right now. And it really helped clarify what I was going through. I guess I'll give like a quick TLDR of like midlife crises. Basically, the theory, this is basically like Jungian theory, so take it however you want. But it's basically like the first half of your life, you're driven by ego, which is not a bad thing, but you're like concerned with accumulation of resources, relationships, whatever. And you need to do that because you need stuff. And so typically, you'll have a plan for like, I want to do this, or I want to make this much money, or whatever. And you either succeed at the plan, or you like fail super hard at the plan. And in both cases, you kind of reach this moment where you're like, now what? And that's under this framework, that's the start of the midlife crisis, where you're like my operating model maybe doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. And it's basically this transition from ego being in charge to like the part of you that's more into relationships, art, nature, that kind of thing. And it's super like replicable. If you read about a lot of people's midlife crises, it's like very similar. And I sort of realized like that's kind of what's happening to me. And I think one of my predictions is, as sort of like AGI becomes more real, a lot of people are going to have midlife crises like pulled forward. Like they're going to have it sooner and sooner because so many of us have like built our entire identity on intellect and like, I am smart and I can do things. And when you have machines that can do it better than you, I think a lot of people are going to have this kind of reckoning of, what do I do now? Anyway, I think it's actually an optimistic thing because it's not a new thing. Like a lot of people have experienced this. I think we're probably just going to experience it like sooner in life, but there is a playbook, which is nice.
Okay, so it's not always, you don't always end up with a Corvette in your garage. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that happens during the sort of like period of midlife crisis. That's typically like when you start, it comes from this urge of like, I just want to like reset my life, or I need to like do things that make me feel alive. And that's sort of where a lot of the
that's where that comes
sometimes
from.
Destructive parts of the midlife crisis come in. Like, you'll blow up your marriage, or you're like, go do other stuff.
Yeah. And is it typically a wonder, you mentioned it goes from ego to maybe more connected with the world. Does it ever go from ego to other ego, or can it go backwards? I mean, like, just, I'm asking you to quote this book, or maybe you have your own thoughts, but can you go from spiritually connected to like, I'm a deadbeat, I need to go like take over the world and become a banker or something?
But yeah, I haven't heard of cases where it goes in the reverse direction.
Okay.
I think the main thing is like some people stay in that transition period for longer, and it's like, they're not fun.
Yeah.
So I think if you have inspiration for how to get out of it, I think it helps sort of accelerate it.
And do you think that is then calling it midlife just a misnomer? Do you think it has to do something else that just happens to happen at a certain time today? Because if Brian Johnson has any effect, we're all going to make it to 200. And I imagine this would hit you before 100. And 100%. So are we going to call it something else? Or is there still going to be something at midlife that's just...
I think it might have too much like brand equity to change the name at this point. And we'll just kind of be fine with it not being literally the midpoint. Even historically, it's sort of like, oh, it can happen at any point between like 30 and 50. And this is pre like, any AI or AGI talks.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so the next one you've got is left brain versus right brain.
Yeah, that's actually kind of related to this. There's a lot of like interesting stuff on this around how the left brain and the right brain kind of like, they both kind of see the world, but they see the world in different ways. Like the left brain is classically the sort of like intellect and the one that like is in charge of language and sort of like solving problems in a very discrete way. And I think most of the tech industry, myself included, like we're like heavy left brain people, and the right brain kind of like atrophies a little bit. And the right brain is the one that's like a little bit more cohesive, and like it can kind of see the bigger picture. And typically it's like the one that's like a little bit more into like intuitiveness or like art and all of those like soft and fuzzy things. And I do think like the related thread here is I think the way out of the sort of like existential dread of like AGI is coming, what am I going to do, is to sort of like pivot more into the right brain stuff. And I think a lot of the midlife crisis stuff is also similar to that, where like that transition kind of echoes the like left brain being like the dominant and in charge part of you to like a little bit more of a balance.
Is that something you think about or do anything actively to kind of engage both parts of the brain, or not really?
Yeah, actually, I think there's a bunch of things, right? Like I've been trying to do more like sports. I think just using your body is sort of a cool way to get out of your head. As a nerd growing up, I was like very much in my head, and like over the last year I've been learning tennis, and I'm like, cool, like this thing can do stuff, you know? And then I think just like a lot of different kinds of art are all kind of like around that. So for me, like I've been trying to learn drums. I'm still really bad at it, but it just like, it's nice. Or even dancing is kind of a nice way to like combine music and movement. But all of these things, like I think I can kind of feel the difference, right? Like if I spend too much time on my computer and just like in thinking mode, at the end of the day, I'm kind of like fried in an unpleasant way. And so I try to mix in stuff.
And do you think Lightpage, you have more of an expertise here, can help with that? Because I'm sure a lot of what goes into Lightpage is left brain, but ways you can bring the right brain in with some of these questions, like Karthik seems to be using a lot.
Yeah, it's actually something I'm like slightly worried about, because by default, I think any like, you know, journaling or talking or whatever, like by default, it's going to be like very left brainy, and you're going to be like trying to solve problems and things like that. So I think part of the answer is like Lightpage will try to kind of nudge you a little bit out of like that like over an analytical mode, and try to just be like let's just like feel the feelings for a bit and kind of do that. And I do think like in the long run, there's a bunch of stuff I'm excited about, which gets away from the like language as the main modality and more like, you know, can it generate you a like guided meditation every day that helps you like do visualization and things like that, which is, you know, one of the ways you can kind of like get in a little bit more into that kind of like right brain mode.
I think a lot of people, when they consider AI, they imagine it's going to do more rote work, math, stuff like that. And it's not going to take, you know, if it takes all your jobs, it's okay. You can start a band, you can start drawing, you can do all these other creative things that you always wanted to do. I always think it's kind of demeaning because a lot of people do that right now, and a lot of other people don't, like, they like their job, like they like it. There are people who genuinely like Excel, and that's probably going to go away. Are we just pretending that AI isn't going to be able to do creative stuff? Like, are we just delaying? Like, maybe it just takes 10 years longer. I'm curious how you think about that. You know, right now it can't make amazing art, but maybe without like a human prompter, because it can right now if a human's prompting it. Are we getting to a point where it can just do everything, and we have to contend with that fact?
Yeah, I kind of assume it will be able to do all of this stuff. But I think part of it comes down to this, like, how much affinity do we have for things that are made by another human? And it's not rational, right? Like even today, like you can go and pay more for something that's like handmade versus created by a machine. And like often the things that are created by machines are like actually better. But sometimes we're like, yeah, I want to feel that like human to human connection. And I think a lot of things are going to kind of go in that direction. It's going to be like more cottage industry, human to human stuff for the things that we like, you know, put in our homes, or things that we want to feel some sort of like almost like deeper emotional connection to, rather than just like pure utility.
That's interesting. So I think about let me see if I can pull this off. This is a crazy thought, but so AI is obviously an aggregation engine, right? I mean, when you make AI art, I think one of the reasons it doesn't hit is because it's just the average of a bunch of really unique things. And it ends up spitting out something that has its own style, and you can tell it's a lot of the time you can tell it's not anything special. It's actually like the average of a bunch of special things. This is just an open question. Do you feel like in that sense with AI, will people have a longing for a one-to-one connection almost? Like when you listen to a song or when you look at a painting, it's you connecting with the artist in some capacity. When you listen to an AI generated song or an AI generated piece of art, you're not really connecting with anyone. You're connecting with just like shapes. I don't even know if there's a question there, but is that how it goes? Is like, oh, AI is just this average thing. You're not supposed to feel something, or maybe you do, and it's just a different feeling. I don't know. What do you think?
It's super interesting because I think on the one hand, like people have had conversations in Lightpage just through chat, and they're like, it moved me to tears. And the things it's saying is, the AI is generating that. It's not like it's quoting someone else when it's doing that. So there's something there, right? Like it's not pure utility. And at the same time, like people really like the sort of like daily carousel of like specific humans' works that we sort of highlight. And maybe that's the answer. Is like it's going to be both, and like we're not going to be happy to just have one or the other. We're just like, yeah, por qué no los dos,
yeah, okay. Very nice. Very nice. So there is room for writers in the future and artists, maybe.
I think so. And I think part of that is, again, like when I talk to the AI, it's sort of like a lot of times it's like reflecting me back to me, or like blending in a little bit of like the collective wisdom of the internet, and sort of telling me stuff, which is great. But also like part of the reason I like art is because I don't just care about my own experiences. I'm curious about other humans' experiences, right? Like, what did this person do? How was their life? So there's something there. Like, I think we are all just attracted to stories.
Sorry, Karthik, go for it.
No. I mean, this has brought up a couple things for me. One, earlier you said, are handmade things really better? I mean, obviously, if you get something handmade by an idiot, like, it's not better. But there are certain craftsmen that make, some amazing products. And the question is, technically, like a robot or machine could probably make most of those things, maybe not all of them, but given infinite time, they will be able to make them. And so one part of it is we're just choosing right now for the machines to make more, generic things, easier to make things because that's what most people want. But if they really could make the same quality as these like artisan goods, if someone spent their time on it, like we could make a machine that would make them. But then the bigger question is, would those things be as valuable? I assume no, but I think the reason is because just humans crave narrative, right? Like you want to hear about the person who learned this from his dad and it's been passed on for generations, and hearing everything. I'm not making fun about this stuff because it does the same thing to me. You hear about a guy that's been a leather worker his whole family for 3 generations, but then it's paired with actually something amazing. Then all of it together makes a great product, and you think about it, and when you want to show it off, you tell them, oh my God, you don't know how, what happened to go into this product versus, oh yeah, this great machine made it, whatever. Will never be the same. So yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if people derive value from the actual thing, or you need that story. And then if you need the story, will AI get good enough that it realizes that and makes characters that make things? Because obviously that will happen. I see pretty good chatbots. I know most chatbots are slop, but they're interesting, like even crypto chatbots that are like, they understand the humor, they understand the meme of the day, and they will respond with like a funny response that you would want from a typical like crypto influencer or whatever. And so they kind of crack that where like, okay, you need a joke that's going to be funny so you laugh, but you want it to come from like a person. So I have a persona now, and like I'm going to make jokes every day, and you associate it with me and my avatar. And so I wonder if, do we just get to a place where AI can just do the narrative part too?
I don't know. Part of it, I think, hopefully will still be that like at some level we're like, I don't want to live in a world where like all I'm interacting with is like computers.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm underplaying like the consciousness of AI or whatever. But like, I do think like we should like sort of like be biased like for our own team, like humans, and like do that. But I also think like all of this is sort of like downstream of like the economic model that we figure out, which is way above my pay grade. And I'm like, I don't know, like, yeah, this is all sort of assuming like we figure out the economics. Then it's like, okay, how are people going to sort of create meaning and like fill their time? But that very much assumes that like your sort of like material needs are actually met. And that's something I feel like people aren't thinking quite enough about, but I also don't have the answers.
Yeah. And I guess a final thing on Lightpage itself, when it's funny because all these questions, existential things, are things that people are probably putting into Lightpage, probably already putting in now. I guess you can't see the messages, I hope.
Yeah, that's right.
But I imagine people are asking these kind of questions. And I wonder what you feel Lightpage's place is to help them navigate these feelings, to maybe start suggesting things they should start doing, or is it all above? How do you feel like Lightpage could help with these very questions?
Yeah, that's part of the hope, and that's part of why I wanted to build something like this. Like, I think a lot of people are going to go through this arc of trying to figure it out. Like, for me, like, what do I do in this new world? Yeah, I do think, again, like, I think a lot of the sort of like standard midlife crisis playbook applies of try to Again, assuming like economic parts are like figured out in some way, the ways you sort of like meaning or like create a fulfilled life, like these are not things that we need to sort of like answer from scratch. This is like there's thousands of years of like practices around this, and part of it is just sort of like resurfacing them and making them actionable and digestible. And a lot of it, I think, just comes down to sort of like, are you self-aware? Are you like being a good person in your relationships? And are you basically like following your curiosity more than your like sense of obligation or duty or like, I have to do this?
Amazing. Kasra, we're rounding out the hour here. The end, I kind of want to leave out for any shout outs you might want to give. I heard earlier that you're hiring. Like, please tell us about the role. What are you looking for?
Yeah, we are hiring 2 engineers, one product engineer, one systems engineer. And honestly, both are like very generalist roles at this stage. I think Lightpage is going to be a very small company for a long time, which I'm very into. But yeah, we're hoping to sort of grow the team because right now we're mostly execution bottlenecked. So product engineer, you would be working on really fun stuff like how do we like better organize the information in Lightpage? How do we build like these guided experiences? And then systems is a lot around the memory stuff that we talked about. Yeah, lightpage.com/jobs for more, but we are very interested in hiring 2 great people.
All right, great. If you are listening and you're interested in this, please go. This is a very unique opportunity in consumer AI. I've been using the app. I know there's necklaces and all sorts of other stuff out there that want to log, your every move and talk to you. But this is the first one I've used that's useful. So if you're looking for a great job, I think this is going to be a killer company to work at. So I definitely implore you to go do that. So Kasra, for people who are gonna go work somewhere, I think this is a great opportunity. For those people who kind of want to more follow your footsteps and start a company, maybe someone younger or even older, and they've been working a job for a long time, and maybe are kind of scared about starting their own company. What advice do you give those people? The same or different for each?
I'm big into following your curiosity. I think that's the thing that will like sustain you through the like inevitable dark nights of like, oh, no one's using our thing, or like we built a thing, but it kind of sucks. You need that sort of like internal like source of energy. And I do think curiosity is the thing. Like you're probably not going to have like the right answer on day one, but like what's the engine that's going to power you to figure it out? So that's the main thing I'd say. Yeah.
All right. Amazing. This has been a great episode. Kasra, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Cheers.
See ya.